There was a disturbing quiet in the home at night. The stillness that used to be comforting now seems oppressive, like a heavy burden that forces me to confront the deep emptiness within after my husband's death. I had learned to tolerate it over the years. I was holding a glass of wine and a book that was open but unread, and the grandfather clock in the hall was ticking away the seconds. But the peace had changed since Nathan had moved into the Goose houses a few weeks earlier. At first, I thought that his presence would fill the void, that the faint sounds of his footsteps walking across the yard or the occasional chuckle from his phone calls would bring some measure of life back into the room. Sure enough, it did, in a sense. However, it also revealed a surprising component that I had not anticipated. Nathan was beyond his youthful innocence. Before my own eyes, he had changed into a man, his confident grins and strong shoulders a sharp contrast to the clumsy adolescent who used to stumble into the kitchen to get food. He exuded vitality at the age of 28, enthralling everyone around him. Unwillingly, I had to face the difficulty of making peace between the youngster I knew and the man in front of me. It was one of those nights when the sky loomed with the promise of rain that never came and the air seemed thick. I occupied myself with cleaning for over an hour in an effort to shake off the uneasiness that had obstinately followed me all day. By the time I reached the stairs, I was exhausted, but a restless spirit prevented me from falling asleep. I stood by the dresser, stroking my hair, and changed into a loose-fitting tank top and pajama shorts, letting the cold material caress my skin. A frown furrowed my face as I realized that I had left the curtains open, and the mirror reflected the dim light of the living room lights I had forgotten to turn off downstairs. On the surface, it seemed like a minor issue. The home took up a large piece of land, with the ground between the main house and the guest house where Nathan lived. For miles on end, there was no one to be seen in the huge expanse. I stopped at the foot of the steps as I went down, a faint pulse twitching at the edges of my consciousness. Time seemed to stop as I got closer to the window. I could see the illumination from Nathan's guest house through the open drapes that bordered the yard. The curtains were drawn just enough to see him sitting at the little desk next to the window. He was drawn more into the job at hand by the gentle blue light emanating from the laptop screen, which highlighted his features. I should have turned to go. Maybe I should have pulled the blinds and gone back upstairs again. But he looked up just as I was about to. The distance between us just made his gaze more intense when our eyes met. I was momentarily paralyzed and ensnared by the intensity of his stare. There was neither surprise nor shame on his face. It was a unique experience, an inexplicable feeling that reverberated far into my chest. With a faint shudder running through me, I raised my hands to pull the curtains closed, shattering the spell as I pulled the cloth together. I stood there, the seriousness of the moment engulfing me, and my breath came fast and shallow. What was I thinking? Not moving from that position? Watching him? Permitting him to watch me? I put a palm over my heart and tried to stop its racing beat. I told myself that was of no importance. It was just a coincidence. But even as I climbed the stairs and tucked myself back into the blankets, I couldn't shake the image of him. The way my pulse pounded under his watchful gaze, the way his eyes held me hostage. I told myself that I was overanalyzing a quick glance and that I was just creating illusions. But I knew the reality behind the surface. Something had changed, and I wasn't sure how to react. The kitchen counters were softly golden in color as the early light streamed in through the windows. I stood at the stove and flipped pancakes with an accuracy that betrayed the many mornings I had spent doing this. The smell of coffee filled the air, rich and reassuring, yet it did nothing to ease the eerie lingering from the night before. I had failed to rest. Every time I opened my eyes, Nathan's face appeared in the dim light of his guesthouse window, his gaze locking with mine through the open curtains. The eyes hung in my head, eerie in their intensity, yet I could not explain why they held me so uncomfortably. I was startled out of my daydream by the creaking sound of the screen door swinging open. Nathan came into the kitchen wearing trousers and a basic t-shirt that fit his athletic, slender figure, his hair still shining from the shower. "Good morning," he said. There was ease and warmth in his speech. "Good morning," I said, looking over my shoulder. With his arms crossed and a little grin teasing his lips, he leaned against the counter. Are they pancakes? You appear to be in a really good mood. A soft chuckle slipped from my mouth, but it was laden with fakery. It was just what was available in the pantry. With a smile on his face, Nathan arched an eyebrow. You say that like I didn't see last week's stockpile of frozen waffles. Very well, I said, shaking my head slowly as I said it. Maybe I wanted to make food? I'm lucky, he said, reaching into the cupboard for a mug and filling it with hot coffee. As I threw myself into the pancake-making process, I skillfully flipped the last one onto a dish and then focused on setting the table. The room was inhabited by Nathan, who stretched his long legs under the charming breakfast nook. I pushed the platter closer to him and encouraged him to dig in. Without hesitation, he grabbed a pancake and covered it with syrup. I could get accustomed to this, he said in between chews. What is this? I asked, sitting across from him. As he talked, he pointed at the dish. A real breakfast, accompanied with someone to chat with in the morning. His statements caught me off guard, and a little scowl formed on my forehead. Did you not have it before? With a thoughtful expression on his face, Nathan shrugged. Not exactly. The temptation to engage in less than ideal habits, like grabbing a granola bar in a hurry or giving in to the draw of late-night takeout, might arise when one is alone in their own space. I said softly, that doesn't seem very sustainable. With his eyes fixed on mine, he admitted that it wasn't the only reason I came back. For a brief while, my fork hovered above the dish, precariously balanced. Should we start over? Something like that, he said, his tone suddenly quiet. A change was necessary. To be honest, I have missed this location. His words hit with a sudden intensity that made my chest tighten. Your absence has been felt profoundly. I'm glad to have you here, I said softly. For a brief time, Nathan's eyes met mine before he glanced away, a faint grin flickering at the corners of his lips. What's on the agenda for today? He said, changing the subject. Just the normal, I said, grateful for the change. Nothing too exciting, just a little cleaning and a little gardening. Is it a gardening project? He leaned back in his seat, a note of casualness in his speech. Could I be of assistance? Again caught off guard, I blinked. Would you want to assist? Why not in the world of gardening? He said, adding a nonchalant shrug to his statement. It would be wonderful to breathe in the fresh air. I gave a fair warning, my grin betraying my better judgment. It isn't as appealing as one would think, mostly consisting of the work of moving mulch and pulling weeds. With a playful smile, he answered, I'll take my chances. As we finished our meal, the anxiety from the night before subsided and was replaced by the calming rhythm of our conversation. I couldn't help but notice the subtle tension that lingered between us as Nathan carried the dishes to the sink and rolled up his sleeves to help me wash them. There was an implicit closeness in the moment that was surrounded by the soft touch of his arm on mine as we stood together and the warmth of his presence even after he had moved away. As I watched him laugh at a joke I could hardly remember telling, a strange feeling, an inexplicable mixture of unease and exhilaration, started to stir inside me. A question hung in my head for the first time. Was I really ready to face the consequences of it all? Years of neglect had left the garden in a state of chaos, a tangle of untamed vegetation. It was my husband's pride and pleasure, a haven where he spent endless hours carefully tending to every little detail. During the months after his death, I was unable to go inside that location. When I arrived, the tangled weeds and vines reflected my own grief. A once beautiful thing was now a victim of deterioration. I was standing next to Nathan, holding a trowel in one hand and a pair of gardening gloves in the other. I felt a wave of uncertainty. Was I really ready to face what was coming? This is pretty overwhelming, said Nathan. As he absorbed the chaos around him, his hands were firmly planted on his hips. I shook my head in shock, and let out a soft giggle. I said there was no glamour about it at all. Glamorous is hardly the word I would use, he said, smiling. However, I am attracted to challenges. I gestured discreetly to the furthest area of the yard and handed him a pair of gloves. Start your trip in that direction if your objectives are sincere. I've been tormented by the weeds for months. As he put on the gloves and grabbed a spade, he responded with a joking salute, yes, ma'am. I watched him for a few seconds as he crouched and got to work, his wide shoulders strained as he struggled to get the stubborn roots out. As the sun filtered through his hair, revealing gold strands that I had not previously seen, I felt an unfathomable wave of emotion. I gave it a good shake and turned back to my own section of the garden, determined to finish the task at hand. We worked together in a cozy silence for a while. The only noises were the soft rustling of leaves and Nathan's sporadic grunts as he struggled with weeds that were especially obstinate. As the sun rose higher in the sky, the warmth of the day surrounded us like a cozy blanket. Salutations. The quiet was broken by Nathan's cry, whose voice broke the hush that had descended. What is this thing? When I looked up, I saw him holding a little, rusty garden bauble. A metal bird that looked quite worn out yet had previously adorned a stake. It's a cardinal, I said, deliberately moving toward him. His dad loved it the most. He often commented on how it reminded him of his mother. With a thoughtful expression on his face, Nathan carefully turned the ornament in his hands. Amusing, he said softly. I can't remember this. It was given to him a few years before he died, I said, now in a quiet voice. He often made jokes about it being guarding the garden for him. With a faint grin, Nathan ran his fingers over the chipped paint. I think we should put it back where it belongs, don't you think? I nodded, my chest constricted as I saw him carry it to a flower bed nearby and stake it securely in the ground. By noon, we were covered in perspiration and grime. After spending endless hours moving mulch and digging weeds, our arms are tired. But the garden started to take shape. A feeling of harmony eventually replaces the chaos. We stopped to gather our breath while sitting on the edge of the terrace. Between us is a pitcher of lemonade. I couldn't help but take a quick look at Nathan as he leaned back on his elbows with his face turned to the sun. You're covered in filth? With a grin that cut through my own laughter, I said. He ran his fingers over his face and grinned. Has it gotten better? Not even close, I said, letting out a giggle. Leaning closer, Nathan wiped his forehead with the hem of his shirt. The movement gave me a sight of his stomach, the tense muscles glinting in the light, and I gasped before quickly turning away. Has it improved since then? With a humorous lilt in his voice, he asked. Too much, I said, forcing myself to focus on the lemonade in my hands. Nathan watched me closely, his expression a mask of mystery. This is the biggest grin I've seen on your face in weeks, he whispered. I glanced at him, surprised by the abrupt shift in his tone. What are you attempting to say? I just want to say, he hesitated, his fingers twirling his hair in a moment of doubt. Seeing your pleasure makes me happy. There have been many difficulties along the way, and I am aware of how serious they are. The sincerity of his tone and the tender warmth of his eyes were enough to make my chest hurt. I said, my voice trembling slightly, thank you. Nathan's grin remained on his lips, but it was insufficient to reveal the depths of his eyes. Gratefulness is unnecessary, he said. I just want to let you know that I'm with you. We turned the formerly wild garden into a world full of possibilities by replacing a number of flower beds as we wrapped off the day. Nathan whistled softly in gratitude as we stood back to see our masterpiece. Not bad, he said, his face lighting up with a smile. Not bad at all, I said, feeling lighter than I had in a long time. He gave me a quick look while wearing a soft grin. I'm grateful for the chance to help. You think this place is really important, don't you? Yes, it does, I whispered. But I feel like it's starting to signify something important to you too. Nathan and I stared at one another in silence. Maybe, he finally said in a quiet voice. The air around us was electric, tense, and for a while I thought he might say something that broke the stillness. However, he stepped back, his fingers just brushing mine as he turned to face the guest house. See you at dinner, he said in a casual tone, as if the changes that had taken place had not affected the world around them. Yes, I said, in a softer voice than I had intended. Until then, as I watched him slip away, his shape silhouetted against the fading light, I knew something had changed. But I couldn't help but wonder whether I could keep ignoring it. There was an intense, almost tangible hush that pervaded the home as night fell. Crickets sang a soft melody to break the silence, and the garden lights cast a soft glow over the yard. A warm blanket encased my lap as I sank into the porch swing's soft sway, a glass of wine softly in my hands. My body had been exhausted by the day, but my mind was still racing with ideas. My mind kept returning to Nathan, his easy laughing, the brief contact of his hand on mine after we had completed planting, and the warmth of his presence that still seemed to surround me. Nathan was standing there with his hands deep in his trousers pockets when the sound of the porch stairs jolted me out of my daydream. I asked, my voice softer than I had intended, unable to get any sleep. A little smirk played at the corners of his lips as he shrugged. I wanted to see whether you were still awake since I wasn't sure. I'm always up, I said with a soft laugh, gesturing to the empty chair next me. After a moment's hesitation, he strolled out onto the porch and sunk onto the swing, his long legs reaching out in front of him. Both of us were silent for a while. There was a mixture of relaxation and anxiety in the air as the swing rocked gently and stillness fell between us. Finally, Nathan broke through the silence to say, "Today was nice." I took a taste of my wine and admitted it was. It has been a long time since the garden looked so colorful. It goes beyond words, he said, his voice full of reflection. Working closely with you and having a chat was a fulfilling experience. I haven't had that feeling in what seems like forever. Just like what? I asked, looking at him. With his elbows resting on his knees, Nathan leaned forward and stared out into the vast yard. I feel like I've found my place, he said softly. His comment struck a deep chord within me, making my chest tighten. My voice trembled as I said, "Your place has always been here." "Maybe," he said, looking into my eyes for a moment. "However, it now seems to have a different weight." I wasn't sure how to respond since the seriousness of what he said hung in the air. I shifted on the swing, my hand on the glass becoming stronger. "I didn't realize you felt that way," I said after a moment's hesitation. Nathan turned to face me, his face a puzzle. He said, "You make it simple." "What needs to be simplified?" "Being here," he added in a soft voice, "talking to you, spending time with you." I looked away, feeling my chest tighten, and it seems like my breath is stuck in my throat. Nathan interrupted me softly and said, "I'm not sure about." "You don't have to say anything. I just want you to see the intensity in his eyes and the serene assurance in his voice." It was too much. I was embarrassed by my reaction and quickly wiped off the tear that had fallen down my face. I apologized in a soft whisper, my voice shaking with passion. Nathan put his palm over mine and murmured, "Don't be." Warmth emanated from his touch, a constant presence that kept me grounded. "It is not necessary for you to apologize for your feelings." "I don't know what I feel," I said, scarcely raising my voice above a whisper. Nathan tightened his hold on my hand. "Well, that's okay," he said. "Right now, we don't have to fix every problem." I never expected the calming embrace that his words and touch gave me. I looked at him at that moment, my heart pounding in my chest. For the first time, I let myself see him as the guy who sat next to me, offering a hand of consolation and understanding, rather than just as the son of my late husband. I began, "Nathan," but I wasn't sure what I was going to say next. "You can tell me," he murmured quietly, his eyes fixed on me. My fingers trembled in my lap as I took an unsteady breath. I was overcome with fear and ended myself confessing, the words leaking out of my mouth. "I know," he whispered. With a shaky voice, I admitted, "I don't want to hurt you or ruin this, whatever it is." "You're not going to harm me," Nathan said resolutely, "and this need not develop into anything more than what it is." His quiet confidence and the faint strength in his voice were enough to make my chest hurt. With tears in my eyes, I said, "I don't know how to do this." Nathan responded, "You don't have to know." He lifted his hand and tenderly wiped a tear off my face. "We will solve the problem together." His gentle touch and the subdued assurance in his voice brought me to tears. The swings moved gently under us as I huddled closer to him, resting my head on his shoulder. Nathan's arms around me, pulling me in, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the weight of my loneliness begin to lighten. We remained silent, the darkness embracing us with its kind arms. For the first time, I gave myself permission to consider the possibility that I may not have to face everything alone. The next day came with a slow tempo, like those lazy summer mornings that drag on in a peaceful comfort. I drank my coffee and let the heat fill me as I looked out the kitchen window at the garden we had worked so hard to cultivate the day before. The colors of the flowers we replanted were brilliant in the early light, and they stood tall and proud. But my thoughts drifted to faraway places. I couldn't get the events of yesterday night out of my head, they left a lasting imprint. I could still feel Nathan's arm around me and the quiet solace of his presence as he looked at me and said those straightforward, reassuring words. But the core of what was happening between us made my chest tighten. I struggled with the terror of tearing apart what I had created, and uncertainty hung over me, putting shadows on my path. I was so lost in my thoughts that I hardly saw Nathan walking into the kitchen, his footfall a soft but firm beat. His hair was disheveled, as if he had just gotten back from a run, and he was wearing a basic white t-shirt and sports shorts. "Good morning," he greeted in a friendly voice, as if the previous night's events had not affected him. "Good morning," I answered, forcing a little grin. The silence was broken by the gentle clink of the spoon on the mug as he poured himself a cup of coffee. He took a drink while leaning on the counter and briefly looking into my eyes. "Are you okay?" he said, his manner laid back yet curious. "Very well," I said in an overly hurried manner, just thinking. "What is it about?" I paused, felt my fingers tighten their hold on the coffee cup, and then I lied about the garden. "It's moving along rather well," Nathan said, his eyes shining warmly as his smile blossomed. "Yes, it is. One should be proud." I tried to change the subject by saying, "You did most of the work." He shrugged slightly and set his cup down on the table. His words hung in the air, thick and unyielding. "I was indifferent, gave me a delightful reason to share moments with you." My breath caught, but Nathan skillfully changed the subject before I could come up with a response. "What are the plans for today?" he said, approaching the table where I was sitting. He leaned forward slightly, his hands resting on the back of a chair as he talked, and I admitted, feeling a wave of relief as I recognized the unexpected turn of events. "Should we go on the adventure of exploring the attic? I saw yesterday that there were a few crates up there. Maybe you could use a little help sifting through them." I hesitated for a second, my heart tightening at the notion of being so close to him. Yet it was hard to refuse him because of the intensity of his hungry, sincere look. "Very well," I said softly in response. "Let's get started on this adventure." With the noon heat seeping through the ceiling and engulfing us like a dense blanket, the attic seemed oppressive. The air smelled faintly of cedar mixed with mothballs, and dust particles swirled in the shafts of light coming in through the little, dirty window. We worked together, sorting through the remnants of a life treasured and shared, dusty photo albums, worn holiday trinkets, and the occasional memento that sparked a memory. "This is a treasure trove," said Nathan, laughter dancing in his voice as he lifted the lid of a box marked, "Miscellaneous." "It looked like a time capsule," I said, tucking a loose strand of hair behind my ear. Nathan uncovered an assortment of old vinyl recordings, his forehead furrowed as he examined each one. "These are eternal," he said, raising a Fleetwood Mac album with awe. "My husband's," I said, my voice quivering as I spoke. With an emotion I couldn't understand, Nathan's eyes met mine. "Would you want to hang on to them?" I hesitated, the seriousness of the question weighing hard on my mind. I said that I wasn't sure. I still have a lot of things tied to me. I feel like I'm going through the agony of losing him again. With deliberate moves, Nathan set the records aside. "It's not just about giving up," he said quietly. "It's about making room for the book to emerge." His comment struck a deep chord, making my chest tighten. In silence, we worked for a while, the rhythm of arranging and unpacking becoming almost meditative. The silence, however, was short-lived, as Nathan reached for a box on the upper shelf, his fingers brushing its surface as the lid fell off. A flurry of papers and mementos fell all around us, and I couldn't help but laugh in surprise as I rushed to help him pick them up. "Apologies," he said, a sheepish smile lighting up his face as he sat down beside me. "It's fine," I said, shaking my head gently as I spoke. We moved our hands in unison, navigating the chaos until one of his fingers touched mine, a brief, fleeting touch that shook me like a shock that I could not shake, and I froze, gasping for air as I looked up at him. The attic seemed to close in on us, the air heavy with unsaid tension, Nathan's eyes on me, a mixture of tenderness and passion in his face, his hand on mine for a heartbeat longer than needed. "Nathan," I began, my voice trembling. "You feel it too," he murmured quietly, maintaining a steady, unblinking look. I opened my mouth to deny it, to say anything that would break the silence. But I couldn't find the words. "I apologize," he said, hardly raising his voice above a whisper, "it was never my intention." He started to pull away, but I stopped him, my fingers automatically twitching around his. The world outside the attic gradually faded away, leaving only the heavy silence of unsaid words that hung between us and the gentle rhythm of our breaths. In that brief moment, we were completely motionless, and the only sound in the attic was the gentle creak of the floorboards beneath our feet. In that brief moment, everything else vanished from my thoughts, the titles, the limits, the years that separated us, as my hand settled on his, fingers trembling but resolute. His contact filled my whole soul with a warmth that washed over me like a soft wave, and his eyes met mine, penetrating the carefully erected walls I had struggled to hide. "I don't know what this is," I said, my voice breaking the quiet. Nathan's thumb touched the back of my hand, tentatively yet firmly. "It doesn't have to be anything at all," he said softly. "Not just now." Nevertheless, it had already happened. It was clear, and the image in his eyes showed that he knew, too. The weight of it all, his presence, his words, the quiet energy that had been building between us for weeks, crushed me and left me out of breath. "I can't do that," I began, but my voice faltered. Nathan edged closer, his knee softly brushing mine. "You don't have to speak," he said in a soothing, quiet voice. "Nevertheless, I want to express a notion, a glimmer of insight that may calm the storm roaring inside of me." "This is wrong," I said, but my voice carried a note of doubt. "Then why does it seem so perfect?" he said quietly, his eyes piercing mine. I didn't answer, and to be honest, I was at a loss. Before I could control myself, I was standing, my fingers dropping from his as I walked to the small attic window, and the view outside was simple, trees swaying in the breeze, the garden we had tended only yesterday, and the guest house where he lived, but it felt as if the walls were closing in, as if the space between us was more than just a physical space, something much more suffocating. Nathan followed, his strides deliberate and slow, and when he stopped behind me, I felt his warmth, that ever-present presence that had always made me feel both comfortable and uneasy. "Talk to me," he whispered, his voice a soft breath in the silence. I turned to face him, my heart pounding in my chest. "What would you like me to express?" He stated it plainly. "The reality is this." "What is the reality?" The words stuck in my throat even though the request was so simple. "Text?" "I'm not sure how to," I confessed, my voice trembling with doubt. Nathan stepped closer, his hands lifting to gently hold my arms. Then, with unwavering eyes, "Let me begin," he said. "My worry for you has never wavered, it has always existed, but somewhere down the line, I can't say exactly when it occurred or pretend it didn't, something changed." "Nathan, I understand it's complicated," he continued, his voice steady and resolute. His words swept over me like a tidal wave, rushing with an intensity one had not expected. "I can't ignore this, even though it scares both you and me. You deserve so much more than what you have, more than my own life, but I won't." Tears threatened to fall from the corners of my eyes, so I turned away, feeling constricted in my chest. His words broke a piece of me, and before I could control my instincts, I found my hands resting softly on his chest. "That's not for you to decide," he stated firmly, his grasp on my arm slightly tightening. "Your presence is the sole anchor that assures me I am exactly where I belong." The warmth emanated from him, the steady pounding of his heart under my palms, both overpowering and inadequate. "Nathan, this isn't fair to you," I mumbled, my voice shaking with passion. "What's wrong with this?" His voice was little more than a whisper as he said, "Is it reasonable to ask me to pretend that these emotions don't exist when they clearly do?" His candor and unblinking stare provided the last push I wasn't aware I needed. I didn't realize I was moving until I felt his lips lightly brush against mine, and the kiss hovered on the brink of doubt, a delicate dance of reluctance, as if he expected me to back off, but I didn't. Rather, I pushed in, my fingers grabbing the material of his shirt as the kiss deepened, the soft touch of his palm, the resolute embrace of his arms around me. It broke my whole soul. It was more than just kissing. It was a release, a breaking of the walls I had laboriously built over the years, and all my doubts, all my fears, and all the rules I had clung to vanished, exposing the unadulterated reality of my feelings for him. When we finally parted, our foreheads remained close to one another, our breaths mingling in the small space that remained between us. "This is really crazy," I said, my voice trembling. "Maybe," Nathan whispered, his lips just brushing mine, "but it's true." His words were like a soft salve, soothing the storm within me as it tried to rise again. I said, hardly raising my voice above a whisper, that I had no idea what was ahead. "Neither do I," he whispered softly, "but we'll figure it out." Together, the quiet confidence in his voice, the steady warmth of his eyes, it was enough to make me believe, and for the first time I let myself consider the possibility that maybe, just maybe, we could. The morning light came in through the cracks in the attic window, illuminating the room in soft, muted tones. I sat on the edge of my bed, hands clasped tightly in my lap, the air heavy, still full of the echo of the passion of the night before, sleep denied, the kiss still fresh in my mind, the warmth of Nathan's arms enveloping me like a warm blanket, his voice a rock as I teetered on the edge of doubt. Anxiety, excitement, regret, and ambition were all tangled in a frenzied dance inside of me, and my thoughts were cut short by a soft knock on the door. My heart leaped, and for a moment I thought about pretending I wasn't there, but again the knock came gently but insistently, and I got up to answer it. Nathan stood in the corridor, his hair a little disheveled, his eyes warm and interested. A faint grin danced at the corners of his lips as he held 2 hot cups of coffee. "I thought you could use this," he whispered, reaching one out to me. "Thank you," I said, brushing my fingers across his as I took the mug. He hesitated in the doorway for a moment, then nodded toward the bed, saying, "Do you mind if I take a seat?" I hesitated for a second before finally stepping aside and softly closing the door behind him. Nathan sat at the edge of the bed, his manner relaxed, but his eyes were alert, as though he were gauging every slight shift in my face. I took a seat next to him, the quiet heavy but not unwanted. "How are you feeling today?" he said in a low voice, and I let out a tremulous sigh as I stared into the obsidian depths of my cup. I told him I wasn't sure, and everything seemed to change. "It's different," he said, his voice firm, "but that doesn't mean it's wrong." I looked into his eyes, and my chest constricted at the unflinching confidence in his eyes. "Nathan, this goes beyond our own worries. It includes the wider ramifications, how other people would see us, the conclusions they could draw about our behavior, and how they would evaluate me. People will always judge," he stated plainly, his palms softly on the bed between us, "but they will never see the depths of your being, the realities that are there in front of my eyes." "What do you see?" I said, my voice trembling. Nathan's eyes became softer, and he drew closer, his fingers lightly brushing mine. "In front of me is a person who has sacrificed too much, a soul that longs to be loved, to fully embrace life." His words broke my heart, and tears welled up in my eyes. "I'm not sure I can do this, Nathan," I whispered, my voice shaking. "You don't have to know all the answers right now," he replied quietly, his fingers encircling mine. The soft strength in his voice, the reassuring warmth of his touch, "There's no hurry to solve every enigma today or tomorrow. We'll take this adventure one step at a time." It was enough to let the fear subside, if only for a moment. The rest of the morning passed in our company, our voices fluttering through the air in soft, leisurely whispers, Nathan taking in what I had to say as I revealed my doubts, my fears, and the weight of the past that still hung over me. In return, he revealed pieces of himself that had long been hidden, his inner struggles with a feeling of purposelessness, his want for company, and his unwavering determination to find something real. As the sun rose to its highest point, the burden on my heart began to lighten. We were sitting on the porch as the afternoon was coming to an end, the garden unfolding before us in a mosaic of vivid greens and glistening golds, Nathan leaning against the railing with his arms crossed, watching the soft movement of the breeze through the trees. "Isn't it just beautiful?" he said, his voice tinged with a faint sense of wonder. "Yes," I agreed, my gaze straying over the flowers we had tended, the soft hum of life reviving in a place that had looked so empty. Nathan turned to me, a thoughtful expression on his face. "This is a start," he said softly. My pulse was pounding in my chest as I stared at him. "What is the beginning?" he said with a modest yet certain grin. "It can be anything we want it to be." His words hung in the air, and for the first time I let myself believe what they said. As I lay in bed that night, my thoughts turned to the voyage that was ahead of me, one that would not be without its difficulties. Challenges would come, along with moments of uncertainty and maybe a hint of regret. I felt a sense of community for the first time in years, and I knew I wasn't facing it alone. Nathan had shown me the grace of letting go, the beauty of making room for the unexpected, the new. I felt a little surge of optimism as I gave myself over to sleep. We didn't have all the answers, but maybe that didn't matter. Right now, the attraction of bigger possibilities was enough.